Welcome to the 22nd reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. Sickness, a death, and anxiety. In the spring of 1954, as warmer weather approached, Mum became ill with double lobar pneumonia and pleurisy. Perhaps all the long walks in wintertime weakened her. Dad arranged for her Aunt Blanche to come and stay with us. I had no memory of when she cared for me as a baby, so I resented this stranger coming into my home and taking over my mother's role. She took one look in our pantry and said we'd been neglected. Every day I listened to her criticisms of my mother, who lay in bed powerless to defend herself. I determined at first not to eat anything this horrible woman cooked us, no matter how tasty it looked or how hungry I became. When I gave in, I knew I had betrayed my poor sick mother. It didn't help that Aunt Blanche chastised me for reading out loud. I still did my weird "the end" thing after finishing one of my books. She said she wouldn't put up with my bad habits if I was her daughter. Nobody expected Mum to get better. The doctor gave her pills that caused bad side effects, and he told my father to expect the worst. In a fit of rage and frustration one evening, Dad took the pills and threw them onto the coal fire. Once more, he fell into depression. So, I lived with a stranger who didn't like me at all, a father with no more hope left, and a mother who lay dying in her bed. Dindin must have been as worried too, because he didn't say much. Neither did David. Each of us lived alone with our terrible private thoughts. Initially, Mum was so sick, I wasn't allowed in her room. I went to bed each night, convinced that when I woke up she would be dead. Fully aware that one could lose one's mother in an instant, as my own mother had lost hers as a child, I lay awake in my bed each morning, barely able to breathe, eyes focused on the doorknob, dreading the sound of it turning, the door opening, and my father's words saying she'd gone. Then the most amazing thing happened. The district nurse pedaled her bicycle out to the farm every day for the longest time and gave Mum penicillin injections, which saved her life. So, with Mum all better and her aunt packed off back to her home, our first summer in our new home beckoned. As Dad promised, the animals were the fun part of living on a farm. Probably due to my father's persuasion, the Colonel gave me a 34-year-old mare named Candy to feed. She lived in a small pasture all by herself. Nobody rode her anymore or paid her any attention. Dad said she had outlived her usefulness. Every day I filled up a bucket with oats and took it to her. I couldn't go inside the fence because she wasn't familiar with me and might trample me, but I'd call her to come for the oats, slip the bucket through the fence and talk to her while she munched. Gradually she warmed up to me. Advised against even petting her, I gazed at her longingly, wishing I could hop on her back and take her for a ride. On one of our bus trips into town, I asked Mum if we could walk down West Stockwell Street to see if Christine still lived in her little house. My mother wasn't too keen on the idea, as she said we'd be bothering them, but we went anyway, due to my persistence, and found Christine at home. We greeted each other as if we had never been apart. She never once questioned me about my 2-year disappearing act. Mum agreed to let her stay with us for a week during the summer holidays. David gave up his bed in the room we shared and snuggled in at the bottom of our parents' bed. Christine loved the freedom of the farm, exploring the woods, climbing trees, visiting the animals, sitting on the back step at night, listening to the foxes howling out in the fields and hearing the siren go off for a breakout, which lent some danger and excitement. It would have been close to perfect, if not for one thing. With no warning and therefore no chance for me to say goodbye, my father quietly announced one morning that the colonel had decided to have Candy, my horse, shot, as he didn't wish to spend any more money on her feed. None of us were allowed outside, but it didn't stop me hearing the sound of the gun from inside the bungalow. The single shot told me it was all over for my poor old horse. I ran into Din-Din's room and looked out the window, where not long after I saw a flatbed trailer disappearing up the drive, transporting her lifeless body. Dad hadn't wanted me to see her dead body, but I defied him. Angry and hurt, I took Christine out to the empty pasture, and we sat in the grass for a long time, trying to come to terms with what had happened. Why did the colonel choose that week of all weeks to take Candy's life? Notwithstanding, things had been tense enough between my father and me to make me fear Christine would ask to be taken home. Dad and I were so stubborn, and neither would give way in a dispute. He'd end up chasing me out of the bungalow, and I'd run around and around it so fast, but never fast enough, as his legs were longer than mine. When he caught me, then would come the full force of his fury, but despite the pain of the blows he dealt me, I always went back for more. Did I provoke him on purpose? If I did, I wasn't consciously aware of it. Something in both of us set each other off. So sad. A popular song, "Oh My Papa," sung by Eddie Fisher, played regularly on the wireless. Uncomfortable lyrics, speaking of a son missing his father, missing the closeness they shared. Knives cutting into my heart. My father wasn't dead like the papa in the song, but the distance between us resembled death. When Christine's mother arrived to take her daughter home, she took a photograph of her with our family. The smiling faces of the people in the photo give no indication of anything amiss. Contrary to what I was led to believe, the camera definitely lies. Mum regularly cleaned what we called the big house, a 7-bedroom, rambling white plaster farmhouse full of antique furniture in every room and oil paintings in ornate gilt frames covering every wall, even up the staircases. I went with her to help, but I really went to play with the many pairs of shoes lined up in Mrs. Mangle's wardrobe. She could have gone to the huts, passed out shoes to every family there, and still had pairs left over. I followed my mother from room to room, a fringe shawl of Mrs. Mangle's hugging my small frame, clumping around in stylish shoes, which transformed me into a rich, fancy lady. Mum didn't have shoes like those. I didn't spend all my time there in a fantasy world, however. Mum regularly roped David and me into the time-consuming task of polishing the silver cutlery, trays and candlesticks with silver on the large wooden kitchen table until our fingers turned black and the smell irritated our noses. Despite their wealth and their fancy houses, fancy ladies and gentlemen, I learnt from Mum, weren't endowed with much sense at all. The Colonel always wore a beaten-up old tweed jacket she claimed had seen better days. As fast as his wife took it away and threw it in the dustbin, he retrieved it and put it back on. Mum thought it odd for him to have so much money, yet insist on wearing some old thing my dad wouldn't be seen dead in. "That's upper-crust people for you," she said, with a knowing look. "They're all a little bit funny in the head, if you ask me." One evening, she made an ominous announcement. "Come on, you two. I'm taking you over to the big house for a proper bath." "What do you mean, Mum?" I piped up. "What I just said. You're going to get a bath, so come on, before they get home." They being the Mangles. This terrified me, because I knew we didn't have permission. On the way down the slope and across the courtyard, Mum rambled on about how unfair it was for her employers to have a big warm house all to themselves with running hot water and a bathroom, while we lived in a small chilly house with ice forming on the insides of the windows. I could agree with her, for Dad rarely hauled the large galvanized tub inside for baths. It took so long to boil the water in kettles and pans on the gas cooker to fill it, and the only part I looked forward to was David and myself taking turns bailing out the water afterwards with saucepans. Still, I didn't want to risk the Mangles coming home and catching us in their house, so I tried to make Mum turn back. She wouldn't, though, and we ended up in the bathroom getting the best scrub we'd had in months. We didn't get discovered, but she didn't repeat it. Probably because I cried all the way through it. Anxiety followed me in many ways. I often felt sick beyond belief, usually when I was in the middle of having fun. A girl from school invited me to sleep over at her house on her birthday. A new venture for me, but I accepted gladly. She lived at the end of Beerchurch Hall Road in one of the new council houses, not too far from the farm. Her mother made a special effort. The afternoon tea went perfectly fine, and I enjoyed myself until it came time for us to go to bed. Then I fell apart. Nausea swept over me, and I begged my friend's mother to let me go home. The girl was so upset. "Why don't you want to stay? I thought you liked me," she whined. I ruined her birthday. The Mangles were phoned, and my grandfather walked all the way down the long road to fetch me. Trust my dear old Din-Din to rescue his troublemaker of a granddaughter. He didn't chastise me, despite the fact my friend bawled her eyes out as we left. Din-Din and I trudged along the road in the dark, sharing the little bag of sweets he brought with him. The nausea disappeared completely. Unfortunately, that little episode cost me my friend. She wouldn't be the last person I would hurt in that way, held hostage by something so subtle and unpredictable, it struck me down whenever it chose. A huge puzzlement to my parents, who never knew when I'd act up and cause them embarrassment. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading, and hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.